I am Andy Thurai, founder and principal at the founder and principal at the fieldcto.com, home of the unbiased emerging tech advisory services. I also write for Forbes in the AI and ML related topics. Hopefully I can add some value to some of your listeners. You're welcome to follow me on Twitter at Andy Thurai or find out more information at the fieldcto.com. Those are my social handles. So you can see my second slide now, right? Digital transformation.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So the digital transformation relies on IT operations. We all know that. We all can agree on that one thing common. Every business is becoming a digital business now, especially the current pandemic situation made digital transformation faster in a lot of companies. When a business is digital, you can't afford to have your IT go down. If your IT goes down, obviously your business goes down, whether it's ordering food, hailing a raid, or booking a trip or vacation, or booking a flight, or what have you. While the business going through that transformation, IT is going through a bit of a transformation by itself. Full stack transformation, not just in one areas of it, which we used to do piecemeal together in the past. Not the band-aid solutions such as mobile enabling things, web enabling something. We fundamentally build the enterprise applications in a much different way to support the businesses now. It's becoming IT, that is, becoming more agile, very cost effective, automated, and self-serviceable. These are the things we would have never thought about possible with IT. In other words, businesses don't have to wait for months or years to realize their dream. Not only it's faster, but the changes are faster as well. Suppose if you have to release the new features and versions, you can push it out. It's not very uncommon to have even daily schedules or multiple release schedules per day as well. So between cloud, microservices, containers, APIs, serverless, DevOps, CI/CD, they kind of got their plate full, IT that is. So having said that, now if you are to look at the current IT landscape, it still is very reactive, not proactive. Because of the transformation that they're going through, they are facing a lot of challenges. Any CIO you talk to, they have this common core 6 challenges, at least that I see very commonly. I consult with a lot of enterprises, particularly at the CIO, CTO level. These are the 6 core challenges or themes that I see across most major organizations, enterprises, whether it's big enterprises or mid-level, medium-sized enterprises, right? Whether it's cloud native or enterprise, right? So as I said, the current IT landscape is very reactive, not much proactive. The main reason is why or what has driven the AIOps field, and it's pretty hot right now because of that. IT teams have a lot of set of challenges in that. The first one is 70% of the IT budgets on average are spent on operations, constraining the ability to deliver digital capability and modernization. I talked about in the last seminar, I actually talked about, used an analogy, talked about cobbler's children syndrome in IT. Basically what that means is IT doesn't have enough money because they're spending most of the money in actual operations on a day-to-day operations. They don't have enough money to do things, to innovate, to bring in new solutions, new tool set to improve themselves. So that's a major challenge across the board that I see, whether it's a big or small organization. And the challenge number 2 I see is IT operations have a lot of limitations, especially if you're a company that have been around for a while. The chances are your solutions are not cloud native, which means it was built using enterprise solutions. So most oftentimes IT operations is often seen as, and most times it is, the constraint to implementing a new digital capability. This is one of the reasons why the BUs have years ago started doing the shadow IT concept, and then now they try to implement the the cloud-based solutions by themselves, going away from the IT, if it is possible at all. Now, the third common challenge that I see across is siloed IT operations. So the trend, because of the business users have the money and they want to go build things independently to deploy new digital technologies, such as whether robotics to scale their operations, or have a CRM outside of the company, or ERP outside of the company, or hiring process outside of the company, the whole 9 yards. They build the whole thing. But guess what? They expect IT to support when things go wrong. Until that point, they think they figured it out. They do things on their own. But when things start go wrong, they come to IT running, saying that, hey, you got to fix this problem because I got a problem and I don't know what to do with that. Our business is going down. So you got to help me here. So between the shadow IT and cloud and multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, and IT has become very siloed. Not just the implementation folks, the operations folks, and the day-to-day operation folks, the support folks, all of them, because not all of them have experience in all of the technologies across. So you got to hire people who have specific experience in specific silos and areas of technology portion of it. Then the same person who has a AWS experience may not have experience in Google Cloud or with the enterprise cloud or enterprise IT. So you got to hire different people. So it become very fragmented and siloed fairly quickly. That's another issue I see very commonly across the board. And then with the working from, because of working from home and other things, working from remote, end users, even though they are removed, this is particularly true with the IT ops guys who used to be sitting in their NOC and SOC centers, increasingly expect the corporate IT services to look and feel like the IT they used, or the services they used, consumed when they're working from home, when they're working from remote locations. So it put a lot of stress on IT for them to deliver that seamless consumption or seamless scaling up, seamless usability of technologies, whether you're working in an enterprise location or remote locations or working from home. The other issue that I commonly see, or I could just put DevOps and leave it at that, people would generally understand, because what has happened is, look, over the course of last decade or so, we have improved our development process and release process and delivery process fairly to a mature level, to very mature level. The agile development, the frequent updates, the multi-release cycles per day, they all have come to a sustainable level. And that puts a lot of stress on IT teams, whether the IT teams or the corporations admit or not. They are not equipped and ready to cope up with that, especially now that they have moved to work from remote locations. And the last issue that I see, this is actually a very, very critical, very important one. In most organizations, the unplanned work or incidents that come up that you need to solve can consume up to 90% of effort of IT organizations on any given day or any given cycle, disrupting the delivery of digital capability. If a critical business application goes down, if people are getting pulled into war rooms, guess what is going to happen? Depending on the sensitivity and severity and the importance of the application, they're going to pull as many people as they can to solve it. And war rooms typically are lasting a lot longer nowadays than normally what it would with monolithic applications, especially when you have a container-based, multi-cloud, cube-based applications. It becomes very complicated to trace what went wrong and how do you fix it. So these are the issues that are facing any given IT organization today, right? So why is this happening? By the way, can you guys all see me and hear me okay? My slides and sound-wise? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, sounds okay. Good.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So, well, then why is this happening, right? There are many reasons, but there are a few common patterns that I observed over the last few years in talking to all these enterprises. First, disconnected, siloed teams are growing in size using what helps them, meaning they're using more monitoring tools, more alerting tools, more logging tools to help their particular silo. If I'm implementing something on AWS cloud, then I'm interested in fixing my portion of that and buy and get enough tools to help me and my team to make it work smoothly. So which means if I have to go get a specific tool, that tool may or may not have a full capability or maturity to help my entire team. But if it is going to help me solve my problems, do things in a proper way, then they're going to get that, which means they're going to be a fragmented tools and siloed teams are starting to build up or already building up over the course of the years. If you move to cloud, or get a new tool as your old tool may not support, is the mentality that I've seen with this. Let's just go make what works now, right? And then the other common issue I see is the teams have become very, not only siloed, but have become very domain specific. When I mean domain specific, there are teams that are handling the APM side of things, application side of things. There are teams that are handling the network side of things. There are teams that are handling database or infrastructure side of things. And what will happen is these teams may not even know what's going on in the other areas. So if there is some infrastructure critical component, a router went down, and then if I had a problem with an issue, then I may not be able to have a full visibility into what else is happening. So I may not be able to fix the problem. And then also the new tool fragments the visibility and increases the IT complexity overall. So these are the common reasons why I've seen in general that companies are becoming fragmented, siloed, and more importantly, IT has become very complex. So what that means is the results are costing enterprises more than you think. I actually recently wrote a piece on that, on explaining this thing. I think I published that on Forbes. The revenue loss per hour of downtime has gone way up considerably. There was a survey that I referred to in my article done by ITIC of over 1,000 large and mid-sized enterprises. Both the IT and BU executives were surveyed, not the SREs and system admins. These are the executives, decision makers. The theme there is IT downtime results in loss of business, because when your business goes digital, if your IT goes down, your business goes down, right? And then one of the surprising things they were saying is that because we got a lot of tools, a lot of alerts, a lot of things set up, there's increased amount of bells and whistles and alerts that leads to a chaotic environment, that it's almost like sitting in a steam boiler room, that you're in a cockpit of an airplane that's going down. You have all kind of bells and whistles. You don't know what to act on, what's leading to the other. So it's becoming a very chaotic environment. And then the other issue they are facing, which is somewhat interesting, is that there's a data breach, security compromise, governance and auditable issues and compliance issues are going up because the IT is going through the change. And they had a maturity in the older IT to handle all of this, but now when they're transforming, they are still in an innovation fixing phase. So they haven't spent time in maturing their IT, which is a very dangerous thing in my mind. Most importantly, depending on the size of your enterprise, the cost of IT downtime, this is per survey, I'm not making this numbers up. If you go to my article, if you go to my website, thefieldcto.com, the article is listed in there, you could go from there. They had an actual finding from 1,000 executives from 1,000 different companies. The IT downtime can cost companies anywhere between $2.5 million to almost up to $40 million per year. And on average, an hour of outage can cost about $300,000 for a smaller enterprises to large enterprises. It can cost up from $1 to $5 million an hour. And an average outage lasts 4 hours, and they have an average 2 outages per year. If you do the math, they lose a lot of money in unplanned incidents, which they don't have to if you have a proper IT. So in order to drive a digital transformation, businesses are rapidly evolving their IT stack to become more agile, scalable, and cost-effective while going through these growing pains. They're adopting the new tools and platforms such as public cloud, microservice, containers, serverless technologies. And businesses are also adopting at the same time, this side is a little bit more mature in my mind, the DevOps and CI/CD practices to allow them to move faster in the marketplace. At the same time, businesses continue to retain many of the legacy and the legacy systems, what they have in place, because the homegrown technologies that were accumulated to over many decades cannot be transformed quickly enough. Unfortunately, for most businesses, these changes have dramatically increased the scale, fragmentation, and complexity of their IT stack. And that's the problem, right? So this has created a growing tsunami of IT noise, and IT operations teams are simply unequipped to handle it efficiently, right? So the results have been disastrous in many places where I've seen. And this is where I think AIOps or other methodologies can help. So when you have such issues, when your IT teams are constantly drowning and costing unnecessarily upwards of $40 million dollars a year, then how do you future-proof your IT ops teams? What can you do right? So there are a few things you could do potentially right? So it's not going to end here, meaning that the IT landscape change or IT transformation is not going to end here. Today, you're moving from wherever you are to AWS, to containers, to Kubernetes, or what have you. But the changes will keep coming. There are newer things that will come that you have to adapt to it. So over the course of the last decade, the development, engineering, and release teams have done a lot of work to mature their DevOps and CI/CD. So that portion of pushing the changes out smoothly is somewhat mature. But surprisingly, the IT operations, like I said earlier, were not part of that. They were somewhat like a red-headed stepchild. They were ignored to an extent. So first thing they need to do, that when I recommend to the companies, the very first thing they need to realign with, much like the DevOps teams, when a change gets pushed through, if it's going to affect the IT teams, then they need to know that. In other words, the IT ops teams need to be part of the DevOps culture. It's easier said than done, and a lot of companies promise that they do that. But common times, I don't see them doing that. The IT ops teams are not even aware of what the changes had happened over the course of last day or 24 hours. And then they would, when the change happens, they'll be scrambling last minute trying to figure out what the issue is. And the second advice I give the teams, the IT teams that is to have what I call a single source of truth. It doesn't mean that you have to have the same tool to monitor everything across the board. All of them being your logs, your traces and metrics, and your APMs, and your network monitoring, and your DEM tools. They all need to be somehow correlated. You need to have a mechanism, because it's across the place, across the domains, across the cloud locations or hosting locations. You're getting all this information. The problem is, if you don't have a single source of truth, or what I call it as a single observed truth, then it's going to be extremely hard for you to figure out what is the root cause. If you're not able to get to the root cause quickly, then you're going to obviously have a long drawn out war rooms. And I talked about this in our last conference, is that the MTTR is a metric that's very commonly used by IT teams to resolve issues. And the MTTR consists of two components. One is, MTTI, or mean time to identification, and then time it takes to fix the problem that you identified. And now what's happening is the MTTI, because of the issues, getting stretched out much longer. So if your MTTI is going to increase, your MTTR is also going to increase. In other words, you can't fix what you don't know is broken. So unless you know what's broken, it's going to be extremely difficult. This is, again, assuming that if you know what's broken, you have a mechanism in place to fix that, whether it's a some sort of a playbook, run book, automated mechanism, or you have some mechanism, scripts to execute, what have you, that you have something in place that when something happens, you need to do this to fix it. If you don't have that in place, you have even bigger problems. So that's another area you need to concentrate, assuming that you know what, and I mean, you know how to fix things. Once you find out what, then we can concentrate on finding out what is the problem. So if you get to what are the root cause of the analysis fairly quickly, and if you know what to do with that, then combine, your time is going to come down. And the last thing that I advise companies is, whether we agree or not, there is too much of data now, particularly with IT operations. When I say too much of data, it's too much of volume of data, too much of variety of data, and even too much of unstructured data at times from logs, from change management systems. A lot of them are structured, and with case of logs, it may be semi-structured as well, or even unstructured. Your current analytic system may not be able to handle that. So this is where the AI and ML will rise above the rest. It'll the root cause analysis, the pattern matching, the correlation of incidents that have happened. Because when an incident happens, it doesn't happen just in one stack. It doesn't happen at the application level. It doesn't just happen at the infrastructure level or what have you. If it happens in one area, it's going to get propagated, and it's going to affect the entire application stack. So you should have a way to figure out if this goes down, that goes down, that goes down almost at the same time. The chances are that they are all somehow correlated, right? So having a human going and taking a look at all of those logs and metrics and traces, and particularly from APM, from network, and DEM tools and whatnot, and then figure out, that's going to be a monumental task. And obviously, I keep telling people that AI and ML thrive on data. So this is one area that I give advice to folks on how to do things. So having said that, how am I doing on time?
It'll take about another 10 minutes.
Okay. So now that brings us to AIOps. And AIOps is basically infusing AI into IT operations. Particularly if you are to implement that, your AIOps solution, if you are to choose, should be not only insightful, not only explainable, should be automated when you find the problem to solve what it is, should be very transparent, and it should be scalable, because when your systems go from launching a few cube cluster to hundreds, even of thousands of clusters or containers, should be able to scale to that level and scale back as needed. And it should be very customizable to your environment. And more importantly, people get confused between customizable and extendable. Extendable is more about, you have future things that you're going to launch that you haven't even thought about. The system should be able to extend into that environment to work for you. Customizable is to customize the system, not just put it as is, but use it to your environment. So it should be to be comprehensive for making a system insightful, smart, and resilient, to enhancing the developer experience efficiency, into finally all said and done, it should help you with improving your customer experience. That's what this is all about, right? So having said that, AIOps is a little bit confusing. The number of AIOps vendors have gone up, and then the adoption of AIOps from companies went from 5% of the companies using in 2018 to about, I believe it's Gartner's prediction that about 30% of the vendors would be using AIOps in 2023. Then there are about I'm an analyst in the AIOps space. I'm tracking more than 50 plus vendors that are in the space claiming to be doing AIOps, right? And then there's also domain agnostic and platform things that are evolving too. So customers are drowning, and the AIOps term itself is confusing, and they don't know what they want. And AIOps is often perceived as a solution as either as alert suppressing or incident management. But it's not just those two use cases. There are a lot more use cases that you can implement, again, depending on your organization, where you are at the maturity level, could be different. And having said that, this is, I said I'm tracking the AIOps landscape. This is a somewhat of an initial list of, I couldn't finalize the list of what the landscape is right now, right? It's a very crowded market, and when you look at the vendors, when you're making a platform choice, just because a vendor is listed on the right top quadrant of an analyst report, that doesn't mean that they are right choice for you. Generally, I classify them into three broader categories. There's a stack specific AIOps vendors. Those were vendors that give you specific solution, APM, NPM, DITSM, blah, and all that. There can be, these vendors can have a key components, but with restricted set of use cases. And there are newer set of domain agnostic AIOps platform vendors that have come up. So these are like a general purpose AI platforms. They tend to rely mostly on other monitoring and observability tools. And they do the data capture, and then they bring it in to just implement a specific broader use case sets. That's another set. Or, you can build things on your own, DIY. There are tools that open source projects that can give you components of what you need. It could be things like Prometheus, ELK, Grafana. There are some vendors that are using these tools to build up on top of some of the AIOps specific use cases. So, but if you chose to go this route, expect a lot of customizations, complication to implement that. But again, you can completely custom build it to your environment. Again, there's no wrong choice here. You could choose, based on what you want, and then you can make it to fit to your environment. And so this is my favorite quote, Yogi Berra, the Yankee great that I tend to use everywhere. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice when the vendors especially explain to you. But in practice, there is. When you start implement that, you'll have a lot of issues with that. So what do I mean by that? When it comes to AIOps maturity model, depending on who you ask and how you look at it, there are multiple levels, and I actually classify them. I'm actually working on the analyst report for the analyst firm that I'm working on. There are 5 levels I classify that as. One is a chaotic monitoring, in which companies are completely siloed, nothing is related, no correlation. Every time an incident happens, people chase everything down, try to fix it, which is a very chaotic, and there are, trust me, a lot of enterprises in that situation still. And there is a reactive environment in which when an incident happens, they know what happened, they know why it happened, but they react to it, which means there could be potential downtime. But then they are able to figure out what the issue is, able to get to it and fix it. But then there is some downtime will be involved because of that. And then the level 3 is what I call organizations as proactive, in which companies are able to get prescriptive suggestions from the AIOps or observability platform, suggesting we expect, because of our historical and current trend, and because of using AI and ML, we know what is going to happen. Probably this is what is going to happen. You got to take some corrective measures. So that's a prescriptive advice that you get from the platforms, and companies are at that stage would be able to figure out what to do to fix it. And then there are enterprises that are what I call it as a, you could call that as a automated stage as well if you want, or self-healing companies, in which not only you're able to get a prescriptive recommendations from the tool, but also you'll have the whole enterprise automated infrastructure as a code, self-healing mechanism. So it's able to figure out what the problem is, and in a most times in a semi-automated, automated fashion, able to fix it rather than waiting for you to fix it. Scale up the servers, scale up the memory, scale up the network bandwidth, what have you, able to fix most of the problems by itself without a need to wake up someone in the middle of the night. But the ultimate nirvana for AI maturity, in my mind, is what I call it as a business savvy enterprises. Not only that you are able to fix things, self-heal IT, but also based on business needs, that a system will be self-aware to know if that particular application goes down during this time, I'm going to have a lot of pain. So which means do whatever is necessary to fix it. In other words, your IT is very aligned with business. Your IT start to think like, act like your business. That's the ultimate step of your AIOps maturity, as I call it. So how do you do this, right? So at thefieldcto.com, this is what we do. We do assessment of AIOps maturity with customers, and I have a set of advice practical advice we give it to our customers, how to implement it, how to do things right. The first thing I tell them is you gotta start small, right? Figure out the most important use cases, the low-hanging fruit, or the most business value, that will succeed, and then start executing it. And once when you find out these things are working well, everybody will adopt to it. Everybody will help. The executive team the board will decide to help you succeed. And the second advice I give them is you gotta streamline your data collection. AI is more about data, right? So streamlining the right data collection. If you don't have the right data at the right time to make the decision, AI is all about data. If you don't have that, you're wasting your time. You got to collect it properly, store it properly, analyze properly, get insights properly. So streamline your data properly, both the historical data as well as streaming data, and then get the right data, make the right decisions. And then the other recommendation I give people is select the right platform. Like I said earlier, just because someone is rated as a top right by an analyst doesn't mean that they have the right platform for you. Yours may be the one that is in the left bottom quadrant, but how do you know what you need, where you are in the maturity level, which platform will help you? That's the most difficult part, not implementing the platform itself, choosing the right platform and doing things right. And then financials, you gotta look at the vendor saying that, what is my total ownership cost is, what is my ROI, how much I'm going to build, and how much it's going to cost the whole thing I'm going to do. But most importantly, how much it's going to save. You got to show it to the executives, and then they'd be able to help you out and move it to the next level, right? And oops, my computer went to sleep. Okay.
Hey, Andy,
now I'm
you also need
back
to
on.
wrap. You need to wrap up, please.
Yeah, this is my last slide. And the other one I recommend companies is to automate the processes. If you don't automate, then at least have a run books ready. If you don't have it, if you're not doing anything with it, why are you doing it, right? And then the next recommendation I give is you got to give the BU buy-in. When you tell the BU suggesting, we can have your app running all the time, and that's all we need, they would love that. When you say that you'll have them up by 99.99, you can monitor that with the DEM tools. You tell them, you partner with them to make you successful, make you help them themselves, right? And of course, you got to have the right people in place as well, right? If you don't have a right team, if you don't have a right skills of people to implement that, you're going to fail miserably, right? And again, it's a journey. You got to understand where you are in the maturity roadmap, and you also have to know where you want to go, and then you have to map out a roadmap on if the timeline wise, what I need to do, what I need to execute, what I need to implement. Have a clear plan. Then you got to be smart about it. By doing that, you will know exactly what you're doing, and in the worst case scenario, if things don't work out, you can also do a course correction to go back. And that's exactly what we do with the customers by doing a consulting advice to those companies. So I am Andy Thurai. Those are my social channels. Love to have you ask me questions either here or on social media, and love to have you follow me or chat with me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And now let's move on to Louis Carr. Senior Director, Product Marketing and Management with Actian, who's going to talk to us about edge data management. Go ahead and share your screen.
Yes, yes. Okay, so we've got about 21 minutes left. We will certainly want to leave time for questions, so I will try to stick to the 15-minute budget we have left then. So my name is Louis Carr. I'm a Senior Director for Product Marketing and Management at Actian. You can look at my profile and on LinkedIn to know what my background is. And I'm not going to talk about the products that I market or manage today. I'm going to talk about what is literally stated there, understanding modern edge data management requirements. If you do want to know anything about our products, you can get an overview of the one that's most closely related to this topic, which is Actian Zen. And that's the URL which you can go and see the information. So, why the point of talking about edge data management? It seems like that would be a pretty ho-hum topic to talk about. But the reason we want to talk about it is really because of edge intelligence. That is, we've got this huge growth of IoT and mobile devices. We've got much more sophisticated, complex network equipment out there, everything from autonomous vehicles to shared MRI devices in rural hospitals. There's so many different applications that we're seeing this booming revolution of edge intelligence in that this is just a few just to get your thoughts around exactly what we're talking about. That whole wave really, if you break it down into tiers, the way I see it, it breaks into what you see here as at the very left-hand side of what you're seeing are devices that may have still relatively little compute power, but because of the low cost of microcontrollers now, because of the resources on those microcontrollers, that developers are even able to apply data acquisition and onboard computational support to do very sophisticated things, including some set of machine learning. And one thing that you hear a lot about is tiny ML fitting into that space. Above that, you have larger MCUs or even 64-bit CPUs that are multi-core, that have significant amounts of memory with them. And now with the advent of solid-state drives, you have everything that enables you to fully embed what would have been only able to run at that level of performance in a conditioned environment, such as a data center where you've got the raised floors and the cooling and everything that, as an early engineer, I enjoyed with VAX 11 780s and so forth that are now all the way down at that grid sentinels level almost. And above that, obviously, with all of these devices, there has to be that network layer of control. That network layer is increasingly becoming another layer for applications. It's not just a matter of the network management. Those edge gateways are now application platforms. And then, of course, just above that, what would have been in the data center is now shifting entirely towards the front end. So what would have been in a data center is now a pizza box sitting in a closet that's not even air conditioned at a Home Depot or out on a Costco, as in Costco shipping cargo container ship out in the middle of the Pacific or something. And then above that, we of course have the cloud. And the point is that across all of this, there is a communication, a sharing of data, a distributing of not just the data, but the actual applications. And increasingly, as we move towards more and more things adopting machine language and machine learning, you will have this need for developing that machine learning algorithm sitting back in the cloud or in the data center, where you collect a lot of data from up front out on those grids of IoT devices, etc. Tune against that data to make sure your algorithm works properly, and then run it in an unsupervised fashion in some shape or form, or elements of it, further and further out towards the edge. And what that will mean is that you'll have to have a distribution of the data, a distribution of the intelligence derived from that data, a distribution of the security around that data, the governance of that data, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, there's going to be more of a need for edge intelligence. Well, if there's more of a need for edge intelligence, there will also be more of a need for the ability to do data management to support that edge intelligence. Now, where will we see that? Well, you're going to see, as you go up that stream, obviously more and more sophisticated needs for that edge data management. And that's what we expect. If you're in a data center, you expect the needs for handling large sets of data, such as Andy described, that you would need for AIOps in the data center. Though all those log files aren't necessarily even coming just from the data center. Oftentimes, as you move into full digital transformation, all the way out to the edge, then the preventative maintenance you're doing, the log files associated with all of the data collected from the components of each device, and obviously the device itself, flowing back into the data center. If this is the case, then obviously you're using very sophisticated data warehouses, cloud data warehouses, if you virtualize that out into the cloud environment. But this is, while being necessary, is insufficient to get to the full need for what you're doing for data management. And so increasingly, as you get more and more intelligence going out into each of those further remote tiers, you're going to need more in the way of edge data management. So one way to look at this is, let's use Andy's Yogi Berra quote. Okay, what was it? Let's see. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. Okay. Well, these capabilities, look at this as the way of looking at, here's theoretically what I need in terms of the capabilities. But in practices, you have to look at what's the solution and the requirements for that solution. And so in our minds, there's really 8 major requirements for modern edge data management. And I've got blogs and much more detail about this on our website. And again, even at that level, most of that doesn't get into our particular product. These are things you should think about regardless of which product, or actually in most cases, products that you're going to choose from multiple companies. The first is the most important. You're going to end up having to manage large sets of persistent data. And I think when IoT really started to become a, something, if you look at Gartner or its equivalent hype cycles, 7 years ago or so, you would find that virtually all analysts, and particularly people in companies like Google or Verizon, would talk about all the data is going to flow back up into the cloud. That's not going to happen. They're just on the basis of latency. And you could argue that, oh, well, I'm going to have far more bandwidth now with 5G, or as you saw before, I also mentioned, moving into Cat-M and other IoT standards to take advantage of 4G, LTE, et cetera. That will mean that you can move that data around faster, and that you have more bandwidth, but it does not necessarily get rid of the problem of latency, particularly when you start adding in more and more devices that are interacting with each other locally at that perimeter edge. For that matter, even the network itself that is delivering 5G will end up having to do much more locally at the edge to figure out how to do the handoffs, to figure out, am I getting the quality of service against the service level agreement, et cetera, et cetera. And in every industry, you're going to see the equivalent of where you're going to need to do local processing and local analytics, particularly as you get to unsupervised machine learning, will require that persistent data. The second thing is that unlike in the data center, where we had really Linux, which is the final winner of the Unix variance war, Windows, And then obviously, as we went to virtualization and then moved into the cloud, we're now really looking at basically three major players: Amazon, Azure with Microsoft, and obviously Google Cloud. When you get out to the edge, you do not have this level of either, homogeneity, or at least just a few large fiefdoms. You have this really fragmented environment. And as a result, when you talk about memory management tied to a particular environment on ARM or Intel or anything else out there, you're talking about multiple operating environments. So any data management you do, if you want to be able to achieve both the persistent local data and the data sharing all the way up through those tiers, you're looking at having to support multiple platforms. The other thing is that it's all about developers. Developers will make or break this. And yes, I mean developers in a very broad scheme, including everything from data engineers to data scientists to people that do the integration and try to stay low code. Taking that in its totality, you're really talking about the need for that data management to be enabled in a way that the entire virtual community around the creativity on these edge platforms has to be able to access that data. And for them to do it, they have to use their standard tools, their standard languages. If I'm a business analyst, I'm more apt to want to use SQL, for example. If I'm a data scientist, maybe I'm more apt to use R library or TensorFlow. If I'm a standard developer, I want nothing to do with a database. I probably want to stay into the level of trying to use direct inline code. Yes, I could do SQL, but I'm more likely to maybe even default or relegate myself to file management. Point is, you've got to be able to handle all these different ways of thinking about how to leverage the actual data that you're trying to manage. The data will not all be the same. Andy even mentioned that you could have some that's unstructured. You could have huge blob files. Obviously, the metadata on it is what's going to help you structure it, but then you're just getting the semi-structured as you would with, JavaScript object notation or so, JSON or something. The point is that you're going to have all these different data types, and all those data types aren't necessarily going to be sent up into the data center. If I've got log files that are of a JSON type and I want to look at those log files to make some preliminary decisions, some pre-processing at the edge, then that data management tool has to be able to handle that. If I'm doing AI, chances are I need to take all of that semi-structured data and immediately make it into something structured that my model, my algorithm can deal with. So I've got to be able to deal with all these different data types. I also need to understand that depending upon the process in what industry it's in, there may be times when, because of low bandwidth or disconnectivity, because I'm using various different architectures, if I'm in, for example, a factory environment, I may still need to worry about certain manufacturing like CAN bus or something like that, types of protocols for moving data around that factory floor. And of course, there's still going to be that operational technology to IT layer that come together. So I'm going to still need to be concerned with the standard internet types of environments. I'm going to also be concerned with trying to leverage the developer skill sets that are evolving and the ability to go from that OT environment to look for web services that might be exposed. So maybe I want to use REST. Point is, I'm going to have all these different types of architectures that I need to be able to connect into. I also want to make sure I stay on time. I've got just a couple more minutes. I also want to be able to handle not just the different data types. I want to be able to handle them in the different modes. Andy spoke about the fact that it's not just this big volume of data that I'm worried about. At the edge, you're not just worried about the volume. Even more so at the edge, you're worried about the velocity and the fact that certain data sets, especially if it's for an IoT grid where I'm collecting, I don't know, pressure, volume, temperature at low speeds, but at the same time on that same grid, I've got a security camera overlay to make sure nobody's trying to get in and mess with my chemical processing plant or whatever it may be. In that case, I've got two different IoT networks that I need to be concerned with, that video surveillance as well as that lower speed set of data. So one is high speed, high data, the other is low speed. I need to be able to collect all of these different data on different channels at different speeds, and then worry about some level of fusion of data to look across different data sets to get more accuracy on whatever operation that I'm doing. And then finally, even though I started out with this is all about developers, there is no situation, as Andy already talked about, the average on operations and maintenance in most companies is still, depending upon if it's government, even worse, somewhere between, let's say, 60% if you're a highly innovative company without a lot of technical debt or you somehow hidden it somewhere, all the way up to good old government where things are something like 80% of your money is just on legacy systems, keeping them running with band-aids and gum. Point is that in any situation, I need to be maximizing use of my developers or my business analysts or whatever my technical knowledge base is. So the importance of open standards and being able to use off-the-shelf IDEs, off-the-shelf advanced analytics tools, off-the-shelf reporting and visualization, all the way connected into those downstream devices means that my data management downstream has to enable me to do everything from extracting that data using standard structured query language to being able to leverage using the MicroStrategy or Looker or any of those BI tools, as well as allowing my data scientists to play with Data Robot or TensorFlow and so forth. So that's the actual points that have to be met. Now, I'm not going to go through this in any detail, and I've got lots of blogs on this, but most development teams, most companies in terms of their IT resources are really sitting somewhere on a maturity curve, either at the very low end where they just want nothing to do with formalized, sophisticated edge data management, and they're still in the area of flat files or skunkworks, to environments where they are using very narrow open source tools, to that's just great, to environments where they're just using legacy proprietary, to where they're beginning to bring in enterprise databases, but those databases may not solve across that entire list of different types of requirements that we listed, those last, the 8 that I just mentioned, to something where you're really trying to use a single platform to address all 8 of those requirements. That's the holy grail of where things have to go to. So that's pretty much what I wanted to go through. I'm sorry I went a minute over, but I think I'll turn it over to the moderator for questions.
Okay, well, thank you. You know, that's actually sort of overwhelming. I mean, really, all the things you need to think about, all the possibilities that are out there. And I'm sort of wondering, with your 8 requirements,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that any of them are more important than the others?
Yeah, I think the one that's most important is that you look at something that's going to work on as many platforms as possible,
Okay.
that's modular, so that if I look at the bottom ends of that tiering that I described, right? So if I go down to a device level,
Mm-hmm.
can I use the exact same architecture, the same APIs that I would use back at the data center if I was running in the cloud in VMs or containers versus running directly even in an executive kernel level or on an operating environment that's limited, like an embedded Linux, like let's say Raspbian or something, Raspberry Pi OS.
Mm.
So I think that's the first thing, is can I use a single API? With that API, can I embed it in virtually any type of environment such that everyone has the opportunity to access that data? That's sort of the democratization of data.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think that I don't know what this means. Somebody asked about the last slide.
Oh,
I think maybe Steve, could you put that last slide back up again? I think somebody.
the only thing on my last slide was my email address, and
well, I think somebody wants to know that.
yeah.
So maybe you could put that back up since someone asked for it.
I just put into the chat window.
Okay,
everyone.
that's how to get hold of Lewis. Since if you have questions for him, I think that both of our presenters this afternoon have given us so many very practical advices going forward. This is really cool. There's Andy's back again. Hello, Andy.
I'm here just taking in all what Louis was saying. It's a lot of good stuff.
I love the way that you can both bring the Yogi quote in here.
I thought that was great. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I gave notice, I didn't claim it as my own. I gave the proper attribution to it.
Very, very good, Louis. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. So thanks to both of you. Thanks to our diamond sponsor, Sumo Logic. We will be back tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning Eastern time. I have to keep remembering now that we're all virtual that you have to keep specifying what time zone you're doing things in. Otherwise, it's very confusing for everyone. So anyway, 10:30 tomorrow morning, it will be our first session for the second day of Data Summit Connect. Thanks again to Louis and Andy for all that wonderful advice and great presentations. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.